So next up, I want to bring up Mindy Seu. Mindy Seu is a fellow at the Berkman Klein Center for the Internet and Society and is also currently a student at Harvard's Graduate School of Design. As a 2018 summer fellow at the Internet Archive, she co-organized the arts track of the Decentralized Web Summit. Formerly, she was a designer in the interactive media team at the Studio 2x4 and the Museum of Modern Art's in-house design studio. Mindy was a lecturer for Interactive 2 at California College of the Arts in San Francisco, and has held workshops at RISD, the Internet Archive, Berkeley Art Museum, and ABZ TXT. She holds a BA in Design and Media Arts from University of California, Los Angeles. So Mindy, welcome. Thank you again.
Can we actually turn on the light? I don't know if you'll be able to see the screens, but is that possible? If not, that's okay too. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay? So first, thank you so much to Rune and Gio and Brendan for organizing and inviting me to this symposium. The conference itself is called the Pedagogy of Design in the Age of Computation, but what exactly is the Age of Computation? Are there clear boundaries for this era? And if so, how can we expand what this phrase actually means? It expands not only in terms of the time frame, such as when did the Age of Computation begin, but also to the materiality. Can we learn from earlier analog forms? And finally, how can we expand our reference points for who we actually associate with computing and design? And since I'm first of the four, I wanted to provide a historical context, so we're going to go backwards about 60 years. So when we think about the origins of the internet, it's really rooted in this military-industrial complex that I think Tae-yoon will touch on, but I'm going to quickly skip over, with organizations such as ARPANET and Bell Labs. But now when we think of the internet, we probably think of the platform oligopolies of Twitter or Facebook, Instagram, etc. One that surveils and in many ways restricts our online behaviors. So this talk is not going to be a nostalgic plea, but rather a prompt to reconsider the importance of counter-narratives and revisionist histories. So today, in the next 30 minutes, I'll quickly address the historical resonance between grassroots publishing and alternative networked cultures. And I'm especially interested in publications. So when you hear this word, especially in a communication design program, you may consider the printed and bound book. But maybe we can rethink publication to mean the site at which a public is formed. So this is especially meaningful when you're considering audience and the distribution methods for on and offline publishing. And when we think of networks, we probably think of social networks and platforms. Or networking probably connotes to schmoozing in a way. And while social media activism is highly relevant in today's day and age, I'll be focusing on earlier, much more utopian ideas of networks. I should also note that this will have a lot of references and quotes, which I've dumped into an Arena channel, so find me after or find me on that site. The World Wide Web, and code in general, is not merely software protocols and text and data files, but it's also the sum of how this protocol is used, whether it's for marketing or scholarship or personal expression. And Agnes Cameron stated that cookbooks are protocols and protocols are performances. So I'd wanted to start by showing a proto-internet publication that spawned a network of guides, cookbooks, and manuals for living. Some of the excerpts or snapshots you can see behind me. So this is the first issue of the Whole Earth Catalog. It emerged in fall 1968, and the founder, Stuart Brand, was motivated by a very utopian vision. This was a push away from that military-industrial complex, and it was one of hippie modernism, LSD, the Back to the Land movement, and frontierism. And in the early 60s, NASA had not yet released a photo of the entire Earth, so Brand believed that if we were able to see an image of the planet, we may gain a better understanding of how we connect to those around us, as well as have an urge to work towards sustainable living. And on the back cover, you'll see their famous tagline, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." The Whole Earth Catalog was considered a proto-internet for several reasons. It was an early example of user-generated content. Kevin Kelly, who was an editor of the Whole Earth Catalog and later the founder of Wired magazine, called it a precursor to the blogosphere. And it was even heralded for creating a network of publications, as well as connecting countercultural resources in its pages. So Steve Jobs, in his Stanford commencement speech, also called it Google before Google. It was a catalog, but nothing was actually for sale. Rather, it collected books and diagrams and organizations, and Brand was really motivated by providing access to tools and ideas. In Writing Machines, Catherine Hales describes encyclopedias, catalogs, and indexes as early forms of hypertext. Because they have multiple reading paths, a system of extensive cross-references, these serve as pseudo-linking mechanisms, and these chunked text entities are separated typographically and visually from one another. And these types of connections have always existed. But what digital hypertext structure adds to this is not necessarily a new model, but just an exponential increase in scope and speed of what can actually be connected. So decades after the first issue, the Millennium Whole Earth Catalog came out in 1994, and in it they had analog hyperlinks that refer you to different parts of the catalog. So if you look kind of towards your left, my right, or my right, left, you'll see this cat jumping into a hole. And here it says, "See Restoration Forestry," page 90. This was from page 70. So it kind of pushed you to different parts of the catalog. And this occurs all throughout that Millennium issue. This one says, "Preserving Plant Knowledge." See also Traffic, Biomes, Plant Communities, Plant Knowledge. So one of the catalogs in the Whole Earth Catalog network was the very overlooked New Woman Survival Catalog from 1973. It was billed by the authors Susan Rennie and Kirsten Grimstad as the Feminist Whole Earth Catalog. However, you can't even find it on Wikipedia because there aren't many secondary sources about this, and it was also excluded from the MoMA exhibition about the Whole Earth Catalog network. So while in many ways the Whole Earth Catalog was outside the mainstream for some, it still excluded many marginalized communities and tools that might be useful for them. So a quick analysis of the titles reveals this. The Whole Earth Catalog contains a universalist and environmentalist ethos. Who actually has the luxury of the Back to Lands movement? And what about those who were on those lands before? Who was actually involved in this whole Earth? And meanwhile, the self-help ethos of the Survival Catalog is apparent in its title. So here they provided references that you can see on the back cover for support after rape, how to get an affordable divorce lawyer, and organizations for self-defense and healthcare. Their slogan was a nationwide network of alternative feminist culture and a woman-made book. There was only 2 spin-offs of this, the New Women Survival Catalog and the Survival Source Book, and the tagline for that was another woman-made book. And just a side note, you can actually read an interview with Meg Miller, Susan Rennie, and Kirsten Grimstad on AIG's Ion Design. So the New Woman Survival Catalog started off as a bibliography during Kirsten Grimstad's graduate studies at Columbia. Her advisor told her that a revolution could never occur within an institution. So in order to do this or make this movement happen, they needed to work with grassroots organizations. There has been a lot of conversations about the politics of bibliographies and archives, but it might be reframed as bibliographies show the politics of the author or creators. In Alessandro Ludovico's Post-Digital Print, he speaks of the value of bibliographies. Because they're a result of a thoughtful and time-consuming effort of searching and making connections, it's oftentimes much more sophisticated than even the most ingenious advanced search. And this process typically links through search queries or keywords. But bibliographies or associations or links, that we build are often based on abstraction of experience or sometimes sheer instinct. In Rethinking the Public Sphere, Nancy Fraser's principal example is the late 20th century US feminist subaltern and counterpublic, and a clear artifact of that is the Survival Catalog. So this is a collection of resources like journals, bookstores, and distribution networks, and the constitution of this public is, quote, multi-contextual space of circulation, organized not by a place or an institution, but rather a self-organized around a circulation of discourse. So in many ways, the Survival Catalog is still very similar to the Whole Earth Catalog, especially due to its DIY cut-up aesthetic and its alternative connections. The visual language, while it points to DIY, is really a result of the material means of production at that time, having to use cut-ups and the software needed to quickly and affordably create a book. The car culture of that time is also reflected in both of these publications, because Stuart Brand created the Whole Earth Truck Store, whereas Rennie and Grimstad actually collected all of this content by a 3-month cross-country road trip across the US. So Grimstad and Rennie had a utopian vision too. This was removed from patriarchal suppression, and they proudly called themselves second-wave feminists. I realize there might be people in the audience that aren't familiar with the various waves of feminism in the US context, so I just wanted to go over a quick overview. While first-wave feminism deals with basic rights like suffrage or the right to vote, the second wave dealt with the consciousness-raising movement, the politics of domesticity and the private sphere, also consider sexual abuse, divorce, and childcare. Third-wave feminism is largely defined by intersectionality, and you might call what we have now fourth-wave feminism, largely marked by its use of social media activism. There is value in demarcating these different waves because nothing occurs in a silo. It gives credit to the work of those done before us, or it actually gives us a point of retaliation and conflict. So whether you agree with the history you've been taught or not, we must reckon with them by revisiting them or affirming them. In the 1992 essay Audiencing, John Fiske states that culture circulates within a social order. So while culture may secure the social order or destabilize it, nothing is ever neutral. So around the same time, in the late 60s, there was a growing network of male artists. And the male art movement in many ways was also utopian. Here, these artists tried to disregard and circumvent the commercial art market and the elitism of the gallery world. So behind me, you'll see a postcard by Ray Johnson, who is considered to be the founder of correspondence or mail art. And on the lips, it says, "Send slips to Lucy Lepard," who was also involved in the New York Correspondence School. So this wasn't a school in an institutional sense, but rather a collection of artists who believed in the dance, or correspondence, between various actors in this network. So mail art used the Postal Service, an existing distribution network, and claims that anyone could be an artist. They believe that in principle, every mail art is unfinished. From their manifesto, they write, "It is an aesthetic text asking for a reply. Mail artists always communicate again and again, and the keystone of mail art is reciprocity." Behind me, you'll see a postcard by Ben Vautier called The Postman's Choice. It's identical on both sides. The author would write a different address on either side of the postcard, and the postman would actually have to make the choice of where it would end up. This is a quote by Guy Blue. "A male artist is often a disappointed artist. Not disappointed in art, but in the art industry of the leading galleries and museums. Being a member of a planetary art movement helps them to transcend this isolation and alienation in art." And this is an excerpt from another leading male artist at the time, Anna Banana. And for her, mail art represented an extension of the burgeoning 1970s counterculture. She created Vile magazine and dedicated its 6th issue to female art in 1978. Also, a side note, Vile was a parody of File magazine, which was a parody of Life magazine. And this included contributions by women male artists like Yoko Ono, Beth Anderson, and Alison Knowles. So this mail art movement led to the art strike of the late 80s and asked artists to examine their own reasons for contributing or participating in cultural discourse. The art strike mantra reads, quotes, "We want to show you a strategy for attaining art strike nirvana. We want to show you how you can fight art as status, art as commodity, and art as hierarchy. Our strategy will help you lose your egotism, self-importance, self-indulgence, and self-esteem." So this past summer, I was a fellow at the Internet Archive, as mentioned, where I co-organized the Decentralized Web Summit with Sam Hart. And the goal of this summit was to bring together technologists, policymakers, humanitarians, and artists to consider what a re-decentralization of the web might be. And we are very aware of the blurry lines between these tracks, as oftentimes artists and designers actively use technology for social justice or education. But for the arts track, we wanted to consider how peer-to-peer comes from a longer line of distribution technologies and networks, like the Postal Service, and how experimental art forms arise when artists use these existing structures. So how can artists be networked in an ideological sense? The phrase artist as networker was used by Chuck Welch when he was writing Eternal Network, a mail art anthology. And this was before, again, networking was pushed into its current connotation as schmoozing or that of platforms. It was trying to indicate an active engagement with others. So after this art strike, H.R. Fricker proposed that we channel that energy into preparing for the first worldwide Decentralized Networker Congress of 1992. The logo is behind me. And after that, several mini congresses sprung up to continue this conversation. The theme of issue 2 of Open NetMag was this 1992 Worldwide Decentralized Networker Congress. And the goal was to conceive communication and organization systems, as well as the willingness to participate in the projects of others. So beyond correspondence, or dance, or the performative element, it attempted to bring networkers together in an ideological sense, just so people can meet in the same space and work together. And here is Tim Mancusi's collage cover design for Netshaker. The special issue of 1995 was devoted to the networker TeleNetLink. NetLink referred to interconnected networks. The graphic language is also quite powerful. Pioneering telecommunication artists like Judy Malloy and Anna Cooey were all active mail artists during the early 1970s before they moved towards telecommunications art, which would then include email art. This is a close-up. Networkers use both telecommunications and mail art as tools rather than boundaries. So Emma, the Electronic Museum of Mail Art, describes, quote, "The hallmark of both mail and telecommunications art resides in attitudes of creative freedom, collaboration, and the abolition of copyrights and independence outside mainstream art systems." Also a side note, the Whole Earth Review introduced this issue, their readers, to the networker TeleNetLink in the article called Art That Networks. So this mail art movement was then pushing into larger performances, and mail artists not only sent artifacts like paper envelopes and stamps, but they also considered how to bridge this analog and digital divide by sending floppy disks and other electronic media. And in 1993, Isaf Kurali wrote, who's pictured here, "Mail art was for me, and for many artists from communist countries, the only possibility to have contact outside of our borders. Even in this way, I had a lot of problems with censorship, and the message of this performance from 1982 was that you can travel out of the country only by post and only if you are lucky." So what is the Eternal Network? This was actually stated when the mail art movement was happening in the early 1960s by Robert Filou along with George Brecht. And they described this as the ethereal, open, ephemeral nature of process aesthetics in networking. They have 4 primary goals. The first was to make artists realize they're part of a network. The second was to refrain from competition. The third was to advertise other artists' performances alongside your own. And the fourth was to acknowledge that networks exist within networks, like netlinks, and to understand that this eternal network going on around them was happening at all parts of the time, at all time in all parts of the world. So at the same time of this 1990s Worldwide Decentralized Networker Congress, in the early internet of the 1990s, a group of cyber-feminists began to emerge. And this term was coined by the cultural theorist Sadie Plant and the Australian art collective VNS Matrix. VNS is actually a faux acronym of DNS, and you can guess what the V stands for. And one of their members, Dal Yoko, stated that cyberfeminism is one of many feminisms, and feminism has not gone away. In 1991, they created a cyberfeminist manifesto for the 21st century. I'm not going to read it out loud, but you can get an idea for the heated language that was using that was quite powerful. And this manifesto was remixed a number of times, and this one is a billboard. Because of the way texts circulate, this really becomes the basis for further interpretations, think of viral memes, and this convinces us that publics have activity and duration. It was also remixed as this video. If you note the folder structures on the side, it actually is a source of citations. I'll just play it.
The Venus Matrix. Terminators of the moral code. Mercenaries of slime. Go down the altar of abjection, breaking the visceral temple. We speak in tongues, irritating, disrupting, disseminating, corrupting the discourse. We are the future cunt.
Interactive appetite search for a website to the world that's online. Take a spin down with technical on the internet.
It's very 90s. So like Stuart Brand, Kirsten Grimstad, Susan Runney, and male artists, cyberfeminists were also utopian thinkers. Utopias are contingent on the people making them or imagining them. And they saw technology as a way towards liberation. So in an essay for Motherboard, the musician and writer Claire L. Evans writes, VNS Matrix was on a mission to hijack the toys from techno cowboys and remap cyberculture with a feminist bent. For them, the web was a space for creative experimentation, a place to transform and create in collaboration with the global community of like-minded artists. And they were able to tell their mission through interactive code and games like the one behind me, All New Gen. So in this game, you became a node in the Matrix, and your goal was to sabotage a villain called Big Daddy Mainframe, in order to achieve data liberation. All battles would take place in the contested zone, which was a terrain of propaganda, subversion, and transgression. As the protagonist, you were fueled by G-Slime, which helped you question your gendered construction while fighting against antagonists like Circuit Boy, which they describe as a dangerous techno-bimbo. In 1997, the Old Boys Network was formed in Berlin. This was a group of women, but they intentionally picked the name Old Boys Network. During the first Cyberfeminist Alliance in Kassel, they created a manifesto of 100 antitheses that described what cyberfeminism was not. So cyberfeminism is not a fragrance or a fashion statement. It's not a separation. Note the multiple languages. And they also produced a number of catalogs from these meetings. So on the left, you can see the cover of the first Cyberfeminist International from '97. And on the right is a mapping of the 100 antitheses based on what was positive or negative by Cornelia Solfrank. So this brings me to a more modern website. This past summer in Toronto, I led a workshop with Jörg Lenny and John Gasnick called LAN, or Local Area Network. And this was for ABZ-TXT, which is a computational typography summer school. And LAN typically refers to a computer network that interconnects computers within a limited area, such as this college campus. But we wanted to question the intimacy that could be involved in a local area network beyond the technicalities. So what is something that you could make that was intended for a small group of people, such as solely the participants of this summer school? And it resulted in this online publication. Each participant made a page in the publication and defined it with a phrase that collectively might read as a manifesto or a guide. So a few of them were a website that keeps you warm, a manual to close down the street, a tutorial for creating a dark aesthetic, a text that shows the value of collective unified thought, a reading experience for slow life, and a page that reconsiders local area network through neighborhood civic infrastructures. So this might look like any typical browser, but it's actually using Beaker, which was released in 2017, which basically allowed users to surf the peer-to-peer web. You'll notice in the address bar, instead of saying HTTP, it says DAT or DAT. It's using the DAT protocol. And with Beaker, you can build and host static websites from your computer without the need to upload your files to a server. So in this sense, your computer is your server. You and your other peers then can become your data center, and it distributes the cost of bandwidth across multiple users and rehosts your content. So an example here was a text that strengthens from collective readership by a participant, Brian Huddleston. In the top right of the address bar, you can see a 1. This shows you the number of peers visiting or seeding the site. And as more people seed the site, then the number increases. So keep your eye on that corner. But his concept was having this description or guide for a local area network. And the more peers are reading the site, the more legible the text becomes. This was a set of directions that takes you on a blind date by Steph Schwapel, another participant. The site itself is quite simple. When you come to the page, it gives you a set of instructions that are quite nondescript, but encourages you to browse the area around inner access, which is the gallery in which ABZ-TXT took place. And if you were to print this as a map, it would then reveal the images that these directions led to. And finally, or one of the 3 examples, is a map that connects connected peers by another participant, Sam Panter. So he describes this: a map is a kind of dream, a connection from our minds to the physical that distorts, skews, and exaggerates. The mind travels, but the body doesn't. It's an interface, an abstraction with utility. Where will this one take you? And it also maps the different peers that are currently seeding the site. And finally, I wanted to share another participant example by Mubashir Bawahi called An Acknowledgement of the Context in which the Internet Operates and the Space Exists. So it was largely informed by land acknowledgement statements. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this concept, but for example, at Harvard, there's a number of plaques going up on buildings that notes the labor and land of the indigenous populations, who the land belonged to before it was taken over by the institution or larger colonialism. So in this case, he wanted to make that acknowledgement for internet infrastructures, and I'll let you read it. So this actually goes on for quite a bit of time and scrolls as it hits the bottom. But all of these sites are listed on that Arena channel, so feel free to take a look after. So I actually wanted to close by reading the open proposal from the Networker Telenet link from 1995. It talks about, again, the Eternal Network and the Mail Art Congress. The Mail Art Congress body left in 1992. A spirit networks now. That spirit lives in everyone. We met a network infant. A media child was born. Telenetlink is its name. It lives in Netland now. The future of the networker is telenet-linked. Mail art is email art, fax mail art. Embrace the child, Telenetlink in 1995 and beyond. Thanks.